Hello YouTube and welcome to another GV anime review. Today I'm reviewing an anime with quite the difficult topic in these times, being terrorism. The anime that I'm reviewing today is Zankyo no Terror, or Terror in Resonance. There aren't a lot of animes that dare to tackle this topic of terrorism, so I was really curious how this anime would pull it off. The story of Zankyo no Terror takes place in Tokyo, which one day gets shook up by a bombing in a governmental building. The bombing is the work of a terroristic organization called Sphinx. We soon learn that Sphinx are in fact two young men, who we only know by their numbers 9 and 12. The mission of Sphinx is to wake up Japan, as they say themselves. But from what? My first positive point got already introduced in my intro of this review, being that there aren't a lot of animes that dare to tackle the topic of terrorism. When I looked under the terrorism tag on Anime Planet, I found a very short list, whereas most known names Code Geass, Mobile Gundam, Guilty Crown and Shimoneta. So I already have to give props to the anime and the animation studio Mappa for using this topic. And the timing at which I watched Zankyo no Terror couldn't have been any better / worse, since we live in a time where terrorism is more than present. Remember the attacks in Paris at the beginning of the year, or the bombings at my country's airport now almost 3 months ago. But apart from that, it still takes courage to make an anime about such a sensitive topic. And following on to my previous point is that Zankyo no Terror gave a very realistic view on terrorism. This anime doesn't try to gloss over anything. They keep everything very realistic, and that's also necessary when you use something as terrorism as your main topic. And that's what made the story of this anime so interesting to follow. This was a story that I was genuinely interested in, and it succeeded in keeping my interest throughout the entirety of the anime. Another point that kept me interested in this anime was that this is a psychological anime. And I love psychological animes. I love to see what goes on in the minds of the characters. Zankyo no Terror did focus on that. The action in this anime is actually only on the second place. The primary focus lays in the psychological game that's being played between Sphinx and the authorities behind the screens. And on top of that, Zankyo no Terror pulled off a special trick by making us experience the anime through the eyes of the terrorists. In almost any movie, series, anime, you would follow such a story through the authorities, usually through the eyes of some super detective. Now, there was one of those in Zankyo no Terror in the form of Shibazaki, but most of the time we follow the events through the eyes of 9 and 12. That, together with the fact that we really dove into their minds, were the main factors that kept this anime interesting. My last point I want to mention was the ending of the anime. To me, the ending was unexpected. I did not expect the anime to end like this. Now, I'm not going to spoil how it ends, but despite me not expecting this end, it was still a pretty good ending. Although I was left with some questions that I will get back to later on. First negative point that I want to address was the animation. The animation in Zankyo no Terror was unsteady. Sometimes it was good and other times it really lacked. Now, maybe I have to cut this anime some slack, since it was one of the earlier animes made by Studio Mappa, which is still a young studio, only being established in 2012. But as I said, the animation was on and off, and in today's anime world you can't really afford that. My next negative point were all those questions at the end. I was left with quite some why questions at the end of the anime, and I'm going to highlight my top 3 here. First one was the motive of Sphinx. Now we get to know what the trigger was for them to perform these terroristic attacks. We do learn their past and so on, but I ask myself what their ultimate goal was. What did 9 and 12 want to accomplish? I find it hard to believe that they predicted that their operation would end like it eventually did. They must have had some kind of plan of what they would do after their ultimate strike. They never really made their motives completely clear. They didn't ask for money, obviously, but they also didn't ask for an apology for what happened to them in the past. So it will always be a guess what they were truly after. Or it could be that I'm just missing it. In that case, feel free to enlighten me in the comments. My next why question concerns another character, being 5, who we meet later in the anime. I did not understand why she did what she did. Of course I can't tell what it is, but after she has gone through so much trouble to reach her goal, she has it right in front of her. And then she did that thing. And I was like, why? What was the whole point of 5 trying to get to that goal and then to do something like that? I don't know the meaning behind that. And my last why question is probably the biggest one, since it concerns the entire anime. That last question was Lisa. I don't know what the point of her being in this anime is. She does have some influence on 12, but somewhere I feel that the anime would have progressed in the exact same direction if she wasn't in it. And a last negative point that I surely have to mention was the English. Holy smokes, the English of 5 was so bad. It was a pain to listen to. Please Mappa, if a character is going to speak English in your anime, then please hire a voice actor who can at least speak a bit of English. So as a conclusion, Zankyo no Terror took a very controversial topic and made it into a pretty good anime. I say pretty good because the execution wasn't fully polished, like the animation, the English, and the to me unresolved issues. But it still gave it a good shot, and that's why I'm going to rate Zankyo no Terror at 3.5 out of 5 stars. It's an anime that took a gamble in almost unexplored territory of anime. A risk that resulted in a pretty good anime. Definitely interesting, but as I said, the execution. My recommendation for Zankyo no Terror is the Grisaya series. As Zankyo no Terror, the Grisaya trilogy also focuses more onto the minds of the characters, mostly the main character Yuji, than on the actual action. So I recommend checking that one out, but be prepared for a little bit more fan service kind of things. And with that I conclude my review of Zankyo no Terror. As usual, you can find the full list of all my animes and reviews over at Anime Planet. As usual, I will put a link in the description box down below. Now if you want me to review a particular anime from this list, please put it in the comments. Also, if you have a recommendation for me, put them in the comments as well. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, visit me on Facebook and subscribe to this channel for more reviews in the future. I will say arigatou gozaimasu and I will see you all in the next video.